So we wanted to get you using the chat tonight because we do love you using the chat on an A to Z night. We always finish every season, and this is our 5th season. We're finishing on number 90 because we thought it was a nice number. We finished for the summer. We'll be back in September. But we always like to finish on an A to Z. And if you've not been to one of our A to Zs before, then you'll know that we like them to be fun and we like you to join in. And what we're basically going to do is we're going to work through social work education using an A to Z format. We're going to go through each letter. And when I get to each letter, I'm going to ask you in the chat, what do you think that letter would stand for? So those of you who are social work students or have been through social work education, which I think is everybody in the session, if I said to you, what does the letter A stand for in relation to social work education, what would you go with? Pop it into the chat. I'm loving this. Look, Melissa's straight in there with accountability. Emma's got anti-oppressive theory. We've got ACEs, brilliant. Assessment, addressing issues. Look, there's loads of A's going on there in the chat now. And that's what we're going to do. Each letter, we're going to ask you, what would you say? And so as a group together, sharing live, you can share your own A to Zs as we go along. And I love some of the ideas. Look, I love that idea of anti-establishment. I think that was great. I like the fact that Kelly's saying I've seen the PowerPoint and can't remember what A we've gone for, and we even discussed it as a team, Kelly, and you still don't know what we went for. Okay, what we went for was A is for assignments. We went with assignments. The main aspect of assessment in social work education, after all, is assignments. Mostly you will be assessed on the assignments that you write. The grade that you will get back at the end of your social work education is going to be largely based on the essays that you've written. Sometimes students will say, and they've asked me, why are there so many essays at uni? Well, actually, and you might hear some of this later, especially I think from Becky, who's now qualified, but the skills that you're developing when you're writing assignments are the skills that you're going to draw on in social work. So how to gather evidence to make an argument, you know, how to communicate clearly in writing. Those are skills that you will need to use in your social work career. So writing assignments is actually good practice really for social work, and it is the bread and butter of social work education, really. Writing assignments, you'll all have a load of assignments planned out. You start the year, you know what assignments you've got each module. There's a couple of assignments for. So we did a specific webinar on essay writing where the team shared their tips on essay writing. And we talked about it as the bread and butter of social work training. And this is a slide from that exact webinar. We said, okay, it was webinar number 38, and we said, we're going to try and give you the recipe and even some of the ingredients for baking that bread, making that assignment, that bread and butter stuff of assignments. And when I thought about A is for assignments, I thought, I wonder what we said in webinar 38. It seems like forever ago. And actually, we summarised webinar 38 with some great advice, I thought, even if I say so myself. As a team, I think we had some great advice for the assignments webinar. We said that it's important that you answer the question, address the learning outcomes, address what you're asked to address, make sure you stick to the question. Think about how you structure your essay. You need a good introduction and conclusion, as the I says. It needs to be well structured. Stick to the referencing rules that you're given, and every university will have slightly different referencing rules. Introduction and conclusion. Your introduction should tell people what you're going to say in the essay, and the conclusion should tell them what you have said in the essay. There shouldn't be anything new introduced there. Get the balance right between theory and practice. If it's a reflective assignment, get the balance of talking about the work that you've done and reflecting on it right. Keep within the word count. We went for an N there for keeping within the word count. Make sure that you proofread it several times. And if you do watch that webinar back, I remember really vividly Kulchuma's advice on proofreading. It was really good advice, actually, and I've taken it on board since then. Make sure that you keep a check on the relevance. So we went for E, ensure relevance. Never leave it until the last minute. We were very clear about your deadlines. So timetable it in, and then you can submit with confidence. That's what we went for. And when I looked back at it, I thought, we can't say much more than that really about assignments, because that gives you some really good advice. But the team went through all of their top advice on assignments, and this team are doing brilliantly with assignments. So I'd follow their advice, actually. Go back, watch that webinar. So when we go through the letters, we're on to B. Tell us what you think might be the letter B. What have you got? Look, Warren's straight in there with boundaries. Thank you for that, Warren. Really important. It's also incredibly important in practice as well, isn't it? Now, the team choose a letter each. When we go through an A to Z, I say to the team, okay, we're all going to contribute to the final webinar of the season. What letter do you want? And each team member goes for a letter. So Di chose the letter B. And I think, Di, I've already seen in the chat that someone was in agreement with your choice for the letter B. So do you want to tell us what you went for with the letter B?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to remember what it was this time, because last time I forgot.
So last time you forgot, and you'd chosen it, and you'd forgotten what you'd gone for.
Yeah, so
this time you'll remember.
Yeah, so I went for B, and B is for books. And I was thinking about sort of to buy or not to buy the books. I think the books actually links quite nicely to what you were saying about assignments, because they are sort of a source, for information for your assignments. I feel that we can get a little bit caught up, and we get our module guide, we get a list of all these lovely books, and we rush out and we want to buy them and everything. And I think maybe you have to take a bit of a step back and consider which ones you need, which ones are going to last you perhaps throughout the whole of your course. Nothing worse, and I've probably done it myself, that you go out and buy this book and you read about 3 pages of it, and that's all you use it for. So I think it's a really good tip just to think about what you need, and also to remember books aren't the only source that you can have your hard copy books. You can ask your library if they can actually put some of the books up online. Now, for me, that I'm not very good at reading books online. I do prefer a hard copy, but to save you money, if you can get the libraries to put them up online, that's a really good idea. But it isn't just about books. There's things like journals, and your sort of university should give you access to sort of all of these journals that you can use, which are a lot more information, because some books do date, and you've got them, and then you might not be able to use them, but definitely journals are more up to date. I was thinking earlier, like following people on Twitter, because a lot of people do put up links to sort of good articles and things. So, there's places there that you can sort of find, documents and whatever sort of for reading to link into your assignments. So I think the main thing from it is just take a step back, think about some books. I can't even pick up some books that I would say will last for the duration of your course, because all my books are packed up, and that's another story. But there are certain ones that people will just swear by, like theory books and everything. Siobhan, your theory book, people will swear by it. It will last you all the way through your studies. But be cautious about rushing out and buying every single book going. Just sort of think how they're going to use you sort of, throughout your 3 or 4 years. And yeah, look for other sources. And that was me for B for books, to buy or not to buy.
Fabulous. Thank you, Di, for that. I've got to say, when I saw you when you in our WhatsApp group, when you said, this is what I want you to put on the slide, to buy or not to buy, I was feeling a bit like, I write books. This is my living. This is my livelihood. I was thinking, and you're going to tell people don't buy books.
I've just mentioned your book though.
I know you have, Di, thank you. But then, I'm just having a bit of fun with you here. But then when I got Rosie to draw the pictures for the poster that we put together at the end of the A to Z, this is the picture that she drew. And I felt like, I'm getting picked on here. She's written blah, blah, blah. I thought, your mother writes books and you think a book says blah, blah, blah. I was feeling like really got at in terms of books. But I think you're right, Di. I think the temptation is to buy too many books. But one thing that I would say is there are books that not only take you through your whole course, but take you through your whole career. One of the things, and I think I've said it in previous webinars, is don't sell all your books when you qualify. I've seen so many people do that. And I've still got books that I had in my training in the 1980s. And yes, you're right, Di, books date. But actually, for me, I find it really interesting to go back to a couple of those key texts. I mean, I've not got loads, but I've got about 5 books that I used in my social work training that I found were really important books to me. Mm-hmm. And I go back to those sometimes and re-look at them. And it's fascinating to see where social work has come from and where we are now. And if you've not got those books in the future, you'll lose such a lot, really. So I would say, I agree with you, don't buy too many, but then on the other side, I'd say do buy some. Definitely. And keep them. Don't sell them as soon as you qualify.
I love books. I'm a book person.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I know.
But yeah, just be cautious in which ones you go for.
I completely agree with you, Di. It was when then Rosie sent me that picture, I thought, I'm getting got at here as a writer of a book, blah, blah, blah. But thank you for that. And it's always good to have a bit of fun anyway on a webinar as well, on an A to Z. So thank you for that, Di. B was for books. C, Dave's gone for C. So Dave will be up in a minute. What do people think C is going to be for? I can see Angie saying care. Communication, Melissa. I'm loving your contributions tonight. They're great. Courageous we've got as well. Compassion from Warren. You can see Warren's the practitioner here. He's bringing all the really core skills we need as social workers in here. Culture we've got. Okay. Dave, I am going to hand over to you. There's some great C's coming into the chat here, and the M's got some brilliant ones there. I have noticed what you've gone for has been in the chat, Dave, but do you want to tell people what you went for?
Yeah, thank you. So just before I do, though, can I just say, if you're going to buy books, remember that you don't have to buy just academic books. You can buy, there's one that I noticed here. I've got British by Afua Hirsch. That's all about race. So just keep in mind, you don't have to, sorry, I just think Di's point was really important. So mine was for curiosity, like Tracy got it. So fantastic. Well done. Basically, when Siobhan asked us to do this, I was trying to think of how to word this. Because my curiosity has been a positive and a negative during my time at university and my professional career so far. My curiosity has caused me to interrupt and ask questions when other people felt it was inappropriate to do so. So it's caused a lot of relationships. But that negativity aside, I think being curious and constantly questioning the teachings you're being taught will encourage other people to question what they're learning. Will encourage lecturers to question what they're teaching, and will just constantly keep your own thought processes sharp. Because as with books, the books that can age, so can the way that we approach practice. That can age and it can become not irrelevant, but dated. And there could be new ways of thinking about it. So if you don't constantly question it and constantly try to read up or watch YouTube or stick to Twitter, like Di suggested, you could potentially fall behind. So I think it's important to stay curious, to stay questioning, and to just ask what some people might perceive as challenging questions, but are very important questions. And I think without them, social workers wouldn't have been involved throughout the years in the feminist movement, the LGBT movements, and the thing that, very proud of Siobhan for this, but challenging Section 28, that kind of stuff. These questions weren't asked, so those movements would never have come. So yeah, basically, I've written some stuff there, you guys can read it, but my idea was that by staying curious, you will be the best and most up-to-date practitioner you can be. Even if you leave university and don't directly go into social work, whatever role you choose to do, by being curious, if you're a teacher, if you're a lawyer, you're human rights, even if you go just to work in a shop, being curious will always be an advantage to you because you'll be a step ahead of the curve. If you could press the next slide, Siobhan, if that's okay. When looking it up, Richard Feynman, for anyone that somehow doesn't know, was one of history's biggest scientists because he was involved in the Atom Project and the creation of the atomic bomb. But he was involved in so much more because he was curious and he was an innovative thinker. This quote I thought was good, amazing. Study hard what interests you most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, I can't say that, and original manner possible. And this, I think, is where I was talking about that point of I've caused alienation because I just ask and I ask and I ask and I ask. And sometimes it's not entirely relevant, but I think it's relevant, and it's sating my curiosity. So just be keen, put as much energy into your work and your life and the advocacy that you can, and I think you'll be incredible social workers. So
thank you. Thanks for that, Dave. Curiosity, it's important throughout a career as well, I think. So yeah, fabulous. Thank you for that. Okay, and we're going to go on to D. So please do put in the chat what you think the letter D is for. Now, it's Becky that went for D, and unfortunately, Becky is poorly tonight. So I am going to represent what Becky said to us. So I think she's probably watching us online. She'll watch it back later, but Becky's poorly tonight. The D's that you're coming up with in the chat are fabulous. So we've got diversity, development, decision making, but actually Becky went for D is for deadlines. And Becky said, look, we've all got different approaches to deadlines, and your social work education is going to be full of deadlines. Think about what's your deadline default. Are you last minute, or are you time to spare, or how do you do it? And so some of the advice that Becky has sent us from her sick bed actually is really good advice that I've put onto the slide here. So Becky says you need to prioritize, and she suggests that she makes a list of all her assignments and deadlines so that she's got a visual timeline so that she doesn't miss anything. Make a checklist, break the assignment down into word counts so it's not as daunting, and you'll make the deadline. Think about what might be the easiest and the hardest assignments, and then set your deadlines accordingly. I also do this. I often set the deadlines a couple of weeks before the actual deadline, because I know I never meet deadlines. So I tell myself that the deadline is a couple of weeks before. And finally, the message that Becky's given there is that she's a qualified worker now, and some court reports and Section 7s and care plans are bigger than any word count you'll be given for an assignment. And you'll be writing pretty constantly to statutory deadlines, court deadlines. So actually getting into that, I suppose it's what I said earlier about the habit of assignments and being able to write well. That's actually developing really good skills for you to take forward in your future career. So think about how you manage the deadlines within your social work education. We're going to go on to the letter E. Tell us what you think you've got in relation to the letter E. Remember, this is about social work education. And then take a look at Chris, who, as Kelly said earlier when she was introducing it, is not in her kitchen. Now, Chris has never missed a webinar yet, and we are on number 90, and even I have missed a couple of the webinars when I was poorly. So I think actually of all of us, Chris is the only person who has been at every single webinar, and tonight is webinar number 90. But Chris is actually at Wimbledon, and so that's her view. Chris has, believe this or not believe it, come out of Court 1. She's sat on Henman Hill so that she can take part in the webinar tonight. I mean, I was saying to her, look, you don't have to do this, Chris, but she wanted to do this, so she's literally sat on Henman Hill. But when we tested it out earlier and she spoke, there was so much noise around her on Henman Hill that we decided I would read out what Chris was going to say. So Chris went for the letter E. Remember, this is about social work education. So we've got evidence, absolutely, because you need that in education. Endurance, absolutely, you need that in your social work education. But actually, what Chris went for was exams. And we had a bit of a debate about this as a team, because not everybody on the team has had an exam as part of their social work education. But most of you will have at least one exam as part of your social work education. I know Brett, another team member, he had an exam not that long ago, didn't he, everybody? And we were really like, you know, he was like, oh, I've got to do this exam. And so we've been very supportive of one another when we've had exams. So we've all got exams, or most of the team have had exams. So Chris went for exams aren't there to catch us out, so don't panic. A top tip would be from Chris to make flashcards to learn the core elements of the material. I suppose a bit like the theory cards. Theory cards and the reflective cards are their cards to remind you of something, and making these flashcards to remind you of the core elements that you need to learn and remember. And a few choice keywords will help you remember more than writing down too many details. So use them as prompts. And Chris was saying, when we were chatting earlier, when she was on Henman Hill, she was telling us that she learned key sections of each act, for example, for her law exam. So you can only learn key parts. Have I done enough there for you, Chris? Will that do whilst you're on Henman Hill? So I think people in the chat cannot believe that you're actually doing this, and you actually came out of court number 1, and you're going to go back into court number 1 after the webinar. I mean, you know, I just, it's dedication for you, that is. So thank you very much. And that's why if you were in first, you might have heard me going, oh, Kelly, there was 2 buttons to press, because I've opened the webinar tonight for the first ever time. It's always Chris that presses the big blue button, and I was given the power tonight. It was amazing. It was like really powerful position to be in that Chris normally has. She empowered me into that role. Okay, so let's go with F. What have you got for F? What have you got in terms of social work education for the letter F? We'd have to hope that it's not going to be linked to the exam, an F out of the exam. So we're not even going to talk about that word. We're not even going to say that word because it's not going to happen. But oh, I love that, Frida, coming out with friendships. I think that's beautiful, because, you know, I am still friends with people that I trained with, and I think that is really important, that development of friendships. So I think that's really lovely. And we've got some other great words coming out in the Fs in the chat. I went for feedback. I went for feedback because it's going to be really important to you on your journey through social work education. You will be given feedback on every single assignment or assessment task. When you're on placement, you're going to gather feedback about your practice from a range of different sources. Gathering feedback can be really difficult. Think about how you're going to do it. You know, don't go for a standard, oh, here's a questionnaire I've printed off the internet, because your practice educator is not going to be impressed if you turn up with a questionnaire you've printed off the internet. You know, think about it, how you're going to gather it. But also, increasingly, I'm seeing universities that are giving a front sheet for assignments and any other assessment task, if it's a presentation or whatever you've got to do, where you are asked, what feedback do you want to get on this task? You know, specifically, what would you like the person to look at? So say you've had an assignment where you were, one of the pieces of feedback was, I don't know, your referencing wasn't very clear. You might be able to say, when I submit this essay, could you give me feedback on my referencing, so that you can ask specifically. And some universities are proactively encouraging that now. Now, that's actually a technique called feed forward. And I would suggest feed forward to you in a range of different ways. Feed forward is a great way of going into placement and getting feedback. Instead of just going to ask your colleagues, can you give me some feedback? Or, you know, asking a particular person that you've supported, can you give me some feedback? Often they don't want to tell you something other than, oh, you were lovely, it was all really good. But if you say to them, I really want to improve, you know, to your colleagues, you might say, I really want to improve my assessment skills. Could you give me 3 areas that I could work on? That's a really good way of getting actual meaningful feedback. So I'd suggest that. And I'd also ask you to take a really close look at yourself when you're gathering feedback. Think about how open are you to feedback. I know, as a practice educator, just about to start working with two new students over here, where I've just moved to Northern Ireland, so I'm changing over the systems that I work in. But I know, as a practice educator, it's incredibly hard to give people feedback. It takes a lot of time and energy, and you put a lot of thought into the way that you give feedback. There's going to have been a lot of thought put into the feedback that's given to you. Think about how you approach it. Be open in the way you take feedback on board. So I've put a little grid there together. Maybe you could take a photo of that, or when you watch it back on YouTube, read through that, have a good look at what does it mean to be really open and responsive and accepting of feedback and respectful of the person giving you the feedback. So we need to kind of really run through these letters now, because there's 26 letters to get through and we're only through a few. So what are we going to go for? The letter G. See what you've got going on in the letter G. I like that, Angie. Guidance, gathering evidence, goals. Guidance is a really important part of And maybe if you're a practice educator, maybe the guidance bit is a key part of what we do. Growth, Melissa, I love that idea. I went for grades. Social work education, I went for grades. I was thinking about the way that, and maybe I was thinking about the fact that some of the team are awaiting their final results, their final grades. I don't know if that influenced me, but I think that students get really worried sometimes about the grade that they're going to get. If you ask any social worker after they've qualified, when they were last asked what grade they got, I've never been asked what grade I got. You don't get asked. So don't get anxious and worried about it. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that you don't bother. You need to put your best into it, but don't get too caught up thinking about the grades that you get. When I'm marking something academic, and I did a course on academic marking years ago, and I remember quite vividly the person talking to me about this as when you're giving a grade, you're communicating a message. So I always think about that when I'm giving a grade. You know, what's the difference between 52% and 54%? It's not scientific in social work, but it's a message that you're giving to the person. So when you look at the grade that you've been given, the mark that you've been given, try and focus on what message is the marker trying to give me. Because if you've been given 51, the marker might be saying to you, be careful, you've only just made it into this, you know, grade structure. But if they're giving you 58, they might be saying to you, a little bit more work could take you up into the next grade category. So just think about what kind of message is being given. But you're never going to be asked what grade you got in your degree. Okay, H, what do you think H is for, the letter? I don't know if you say H or H, I don't know, H, the letter that's on screen there. What have you got? Warren, I'm loving this. Warren's going in with help. Yes, I'm hoping it's not a call for help from Warren in the chat there, but it is just thinking about that, you know, that we can give help to people. Okay. I went for, and this might be a bit controversial here, but I went for horrible modules. That's what I went for. And I went for that because some students just really dislike some modules. And this team, they will have in our WhatsApp group, they'll go, oh yeah, I hated that module as well. You get some of that conversation going on. And I love sitting back and watching it. As a practice educator, I love the chat that we have in the WhatsApp group and the way that they talk to one another about some of the educational experiences. I'm learning more about it. But the horrible modules, I've definitely found lots of similarities in terms of what students struggle with or complain about or say they don't like, or what they complain about as horrible modules. It's important for you to recognise that actually the social work curriculum is created to support you in developing the skills you're going to need as professionals. It's research modules. Most people really do not like the research module. And I was going to use that for the R and talk about it, but we went for something else for the R. But then I thought, well, we'll go for just horrible modules generally. People do not like research modules. But actually, do you know what? When you are qualified, you are basically using research skills every day in your practice because you are gathering information. You are analysing that information, you're making recommendations, you're making decisions, you're communicating all of that. That's basically what research is about. You are learning the core skills about how you develop a hypothesis, how you prove that hypothesis, being open to thinking about evidence sources. They're really important. So learning research skills is actually really helpful. So what I'd say to you is, if you've got a view about a horrible module, if you think this is a horrible module, reflect on why do you feel that way? What is it that makes you think that that's a horrible module? Because actually, the approach that you take to something is key. When I was trying to put the slides together, I put something into the picture finder that I have that said something like horror, because I was thinking about horrible modules. I wanted a horror picture. So I didn't give a proper horror picture. This was the horror picture. And when I looked at it, I thought, you see, I don't think that's horrible. I don't think it's horror. I think actually that's really beautiful. The way that you look at something. Now, if I saw that in my kitchen, I'd think, oh, that's horrible. I've got to get rid of it. You know, it's a spider's web. But if I saw it outside, in, you know, the grass with all of the morning dew on it like that. I think, how beautiful is that it's been created? It's the way we look at something that completely changes it. So the way you approach the modules that you think are horrible, try and think about that. Just think about it in that way. We're going to go on to Kai's choice of letter now. We're going for, Kai chose I. And so what do you think Kai's gone for, or what do you think the letter I might stand for? I'm looking in the chat there, there's some good suggestions coming in for I, but Kai, do you want to tell people what you went for the letter I?
Yeah, so I went for, following on from horrible modules, I went for interprofessional collaboration. No, it wasn't that bad actually, but I went for it because it was sort of an aspect of social work that I didn't really think about before I started my course, and then I ended up having a whole module dedicated to it. And in the module I sort of realized that it was mostly about teamwork, but in a different way that I was used to. So we all know what teamwork is, and I was thinking it's usually something that's done with people that either you know or you're getting to know, so maybe people on your course or a sports team or something, or like our webinar team even. And the difference that I'd noticed with interprofessional collaboration was that it's still working as a team, but it's could be a team with people that you don't know, which is something that can be tricky, something that I found tricky, and something that you might not be used to when you're studying. So in our module, we had, I think, about 400 students from all of the health and social care courses, and then we were split into groups of 10 to work on this presentation project. And I found there was a big difference between working in this team, which was all students I didn't know. It was completely different to when I was working with my social work cohort, where we obviously knew each other at least a little bit. And within the cohort, we would work collaboratively and trust each other, and we'd always have a good output. But in my interprofessional group, it sort of seemed like no one else could really be bothered so much, and it was all online, and I found I was mostly talking to myself, or I'd definitely be the only person with a camera on, and I found that quite difficult. And I think it ended up being, with most of the work was left to me and this one other person, thankfully. And I think if the two of us hadn't put the work in, we probably wouldn't have passed that module as a group. And I'm not sort of saying that to show off being a nerd or getting the work done, but more of a reflection, as Siobhan was saying, for these horrible modules, we've got to reflect on what makes them difficult. And I thought this module could be a really good preparation, because it sort of might mirror future scenarios that come up on placement or in practice. So there might be times in the future where I'm working in a social work team with colleagues that I know really well, and then I have to go off into the interprofessional settings, maybe with strangers who might not be as engaged or I am, or they might even sort of see me in a different way as my social work team. So they might think that their profession's higher up than social work, which I think can be quite common. And then I thought about this more, and I thought that this module was sort of showing me that it's about developing the right skills and figuring out how to handle these sorts of situations and handle working in a team in different contexts. So rather than just sort of lamenting over my group not as being as helpful as I would have liked them to be, I should reflect on how maybe I could have encouraged them to engage more and help out more. And thinking about that, and if I do that next time, that could help me in the future. So I think going into uni and going into studying social work, you have to think that you might have skill sets that work for you already for teamwork, but there's going to be situations where you have to adapt the skill sets that you already have into environments that are new to you. And if you can do that, then you're going to get way more out of these sort of modules, these horrible modules, as Siobhan calls them, and figure out a way to actually get something from them rather than just hate them the whole time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Kai. Love your attitude to that and the way you've used that, you know, as you've come to the end of your first year of your degree. I just love the way you've reflected throughout and reflected on the learning and what you can do differently. I think it's great. So thank you for that. Great. Okay, we're jogging on through all of the letters. What do you think we've gone for the letter J? I'm not going to give too much time over to you because you're coming up with brilliant things in the chat already, but we've really got to get through the night, haven't we? But we've got judgment, justice, just a couple of justice. Okay. I went for join in. I was thinking about this is about social work education, and what I want to encourage you to do is join in as much as you can. You know, join discussions in your classes. I think, you know, where Kai's just said, when it's online and people are not switching their cameras on, I think people are experiencing that even in social work courses, and that's really tough. It's really difficult, but you're not going to get out of it either. So join in discussions with your classmates, particularly that will really help you to see different perspectives. I think there's also join in societies. I think Kelly and Kultuma, you were founding members, weren't you, of the Social Justice Society at your university? And it's won lots of awards since. I think join societies. Now, it could be that you join or set up like Kelly and Kultuma. They'll tell you about it in the chat if you like. You set up or join a society that's linked to social work, like their society is a social justice one. But equally, you might join a society like Brett is a member of the Photography Society at his university. I think just being a member of something that will help you to join in and get, you know, it will help you learn about yourself, and it'll also enhance your CV as well. What I would say to you is take every opportunity that you can. You know, being in an education setting has got so much to offer. I still remember being, you know, I was on the Students' Union. I became president of the college at my university. I loved all of that. And I think it gave me a real passion for politics and for advocacy. And I think joining in with stuff like that outside of just your course can be great. And you'll never get that opportunity again for all of those different societies, you know. And it's probably skydiving or something. I mean, just join in with something. There's probably so many different opportunities that you've got now that you can join in. And the dictionary definition of join is about linking or connecting. The two pictures on the screen here are the when I went into icons and put join, that's what came out. It's about being stronger together, isn't it? It goes back to what Kai was saying about interprofessional working, being stronger together. It's that joining together that is really important. What we're going to go for K. Now, I think this is a really obvious one. I think we've gone obvious with the letter K, but yeah, there you go. Angie's gone straight in with it with knowledge. I think we went straight into knowledge. So social work, thankfully, remains a generic profession, and therefore the knowledge base is very wide. You've got to learn about working with children, working with adults. You know, there's a whole range of knowledge that you need to learn about. I put onto the slide different aspects of knowledge. Body and Statham did a literature review, and they noted a distinction between 3 different types of knowledge. Tacit knowledge, which is sometimes referred to as practice wisdom. It's the stuff that it's really the stuff that no one can teach you, but you just learn, you know, that stuff that you kind of just know. And then there's functional knowledge. That's the knowledge that you need to do particular tasks. So particular task-based knowledge in social work. And then you've got your professional knowledge, which brings everything together. You should be learning some of all of that in the university setting. The tacit knowledge, nobody's going to teach it you, but you're going to learn it. One bit of tacit knowledge I know you're all learning. I call it the 4:45 moment. It's that moment at 4:45 where the lecturer says, has anybody got any questions? And no one asks a question after 4:45, because you know if you do, everyone in the room is going to talk. Everyone starts putting their coats on. You've learned. Nobody told you that. Nobody said don't ask a question after 4:45, except Dave, probably with his curiosity. But nobody told you that, but everybody learns it. That's your tacit knowledge. You're going to learn some stuff that nobody's teaching you, but you're just learning. And then other ways of looking at knowledge are Pawson and colleagues developed a classification of knowledge for the Social Care Institute of Excellence, which was organizational knowledge, practitioner knowledge, user knowledge, research-based knowledge, policy and community knowledge. We try and draw on all of those forms of knowledge in our webinars. You're only going to learn some of the knowledge that you need to be a social worker on your course. So actually, you're going to have to keep up to date with that knowledge all the time. You're going to have to be like Kai and be reflective and think about it, all that stuff. Oh, and Kai's telling us he's well known to ask things past 4:45. Maybe that's where Kai's learning and a passion for his course comes in. I don't know. But that whole bit about asking, learning more stuff, using the wide knowledge base. I know some people go into uni and think, I'm only ever going to work with children, so I'm only interested in that stuff, not really bothered about the other stuff. You've got to learn it. You need to know. Even if you do only ever work with children, children would live with adults, you know, and adults live with children, and we need to know. It needs to be that generic knowledge base, a hugely wide knowledge base that you're going to be going into. Okay, we did go a bit obvious there with the K. What about the L? Now, actually, Brett had the letter L, but Brett has started a new job role tonight and is on a shift where he can't be here until the end of the webinar. So I'm going to need to try as best as I can to represent what Brett said. But we've got lots of L's there. Learning is a key one. Love, really important. We've done webinars on love, haven't we? And webinars on kindness because they're so important. Oh, I like that idea, Kultuma. Laugh. You do need to laugh in your education. But Brett went for lived experience. Now, Brett has almost written an entire essay, a short essay, but he's almost written an entire essay about his thoughts about lived experience. He's referenced it and everything. So I've passed it on to Diane Kultuma. When they send out the follow-up email at the weekend, they're going to add it into that because it is really valuable to get. But basically, what Brett was saying was that lived experience, which is defined, as he said here, as the things that someone's experienced for themselves, especially if that experience gives the person a knowledge or understanding that other people can only have heard about. And Brett was going to talk about the value of lived experience and the way that we as a webinar team value lived experience, and people who've come and shared with us their lived experiences, how much we've learned from that. I would say to you, I learned a lot from my own lived experience that I've shared with you in some of the webinars when I had a stroke and I've received social work services. It gave me a very different view of providing social work when you're on the other side, if you like, that lived experience. So that's the lived experience. I cannot do it the justice that Brett was going to do it. So we're going to send out what Brett said. Some people choose to share their lived experience and some people choose not to. Members of our team have lived experience and some of them have shared and some of them haven't. And that's a choice thing. And you need to think about that. And if you have lived experience, how much of that you want to share and where is appropriate to share and where it's not appropriate to share is also important for you to think about. And then I've had to put the little picture on here because Rosie, who does the pictures for us, I sent her the list of words and she sent back the poster, and I looked at lived experience and I thought, what is that? Where's that come from for lived experience? And then the team were laughing at me because they were saying, well, it's a life in a game, isn't it? And I had no idea about that. But then what we also didn't know was some of the team have tattoos with that very picture on, and I didn't know that. But so that's where the lived experience, maybe in the chat they'll tell you my complete lack of knowledge and awareness of I think online games made them laugh. But that was the L. Right, what we're going for with M. Where do you go with M? Oh, Dave's gone. I was thinking M, Mario, what's that got to do? And then I thought, yeah, it did lead well in the chat. Absolutely, Dave. Where are we going with the motivational? Thank you. Or motivation. What's your motivation for the course? Brilliant one there. I like morale. That's a great one as well. Managerial methods. Oh, we've got a double there. I actually went for mind the gap. I went for mind the gap because very often in early part of your career, I hear so many newly qualified workers talking about the gap between what they've learned in practice and what they learned at university and what they're doing in practice. And it's an international issue. This is actually the International Federation of Social Workers, in their education committee, set up a committee to look at what they called the gap between education and training. So this whole thing about the gap, and some of you who've been coming to the webinars all along may know Omar, who was one of our original team members. Omar co-directed, I co-directed with Omar the new social worker project for IFSW. Omar is now taking the lead on that project, and I've stepped back. But these were some of the initial findings from that project, the new Social Workers International Federation of Social Workers European project, where the questionnaire was completed, the survey was completed, and the interviews, some interviews followed that as well. More than 1,000 social workers in the first 5 years of their employment or final year of their training were interviewed as part of this project. And this is an image that Rosie drew to illustrate some of those initial findings and the gap between education and employment. So some of the things that came out were poor quality placements or internships that people talked about. Once in employment, people talked about a lack of support from employers, the social work role being fluid, which causes some difficulties. There was an in-depth analysis in there about different supports that were provided in employment. But one of the things I wanted to pick out of this was, even in this international project, concerns around professional training not preparing students for the social work role. And when I was involved in that project, then it was really clear, so many new social workers saying, we don't feel like the training equips us for the role. And I want to share with you a reflection as a social worker who's been qualified for 32 years. In the first 2.5, maybe 3 years of my social work employment, I thought that my social work training had not equipped me for my job. The longer that I've been in the job, the more that I realised my social work education did equip me for the job. Because what it taught me was how to think critically. It taught me how to reflect. It taught me how to hypothesize. It didn't teach me how to fill the forms in at the time, but the forms are going to change 100 times during your career. So don't expect your social work education to teach you how to fill forms in, to teach you how to do the mechanistics of the job. What it's going to teach you is the intellectual aspects. It's going to prepare you. So even if you do feel that, hold on to that. Education is something that you're going to go back to over and over again in your career. The gap is not as big as you think it is. I think when you first take the first step, you think the gap's huge. The longer you've been in the job, the more the gap will actually close, and you'll realize how much the education has prepared you for the role. That's just my thought. So mind the gap was the N. What do you think we've gone for with the letter N? What might we have gone with for the N? We've got networking. That's a good one. I like the idea of networking. There's so many words that we could go for, but of course what we also have to do is look at when we put the whole A to Z together, and have we communicated everything that we want to communicate about social work education. So actually what we went for was, not all social work is statutory, and it kind of links into that, the perceived gap. You know, we are not training social work students to just be in a statutory social work role and fill those forms in. You need to recognise that social work takes place in many different settings. Unfortunately, in the UK, particularly England, I think more so than any of the other parts of the UK, we've become so focused on the statutory role as social work. People will say to me, oh, I'm not doing social work now. They're still doing social work. They just don't have it in their job title, you know? Or I've had students who say to me, oh, it's not a social work placement. If you're on a placement as part of your social work training, it's a social work placement. It doesn't matter even if there's no social workers in that setting. This is a social work placement. Social work happens all over the place. The learning that you can get from diverse experiences is exceptional. I think that voluntary sector placements offer so much more. And sometimes statutory placements are very blinkered and very limited, and actually looking out at other opportunities is amazing. I've tried to just put a couple of things together about different places social work takes place in that little illustration, but there's even more. And I put in there the placement I thought was the best placement I've ever done with a student. She went into a solicitor's office. No other social workers there. She had the best placement ever. So loads of different opportunities. Social work is not just statutory. Okay, we really need to hurry up. We've got the O. Okay, I'm not wanting to rush team members who've still got to come. I will try and rush, but we've got O, and Jenna went for O. I'm not going to give people too much time in the chat, Jenna. I'm just going to go straight over to you. What did you go for, Jenna?
I think I've just seen that Angie got mine straight away, so I've gone with organisation. And rightly so for me, because prior to starting studies, I was so disorganised. It actually led to a life full of chaos. My life was so unstructured and so chaotic. And I started studying and I thought, whoa, this is super, super full on. And this was on the access course. It was really, really full on. And I found that just by putting a bit of structure into my life, it lifted such a weight from my shoulders. And examples of how I did this was adopting the use of a diary. I've never owned a diary. I'm 36 years old and never in my life have I had a diary. But yeah, I got a diary, but I also bought the pocket one for my handbag. So anytime I put one in one, it went straight into the other. Calendar, apps on my phone, my notebook, everything. I adopted the use of everything, basically brain dumped onto that paper. Whiteboard, I've adopted the use for whiteboard, and with that I put the assignments that I've got due and I'll put them in date order, so the soonest one first and so on and so forth, and I'll try and tackle it that way on. And it's just so self-rewarding to rub one of those assignments off or put a big smiley face next to it. And I like to colour code everything and mind mapping and everything such as this, and I've gained great tips from fellow students in my cohort of how to organise myself better. I just find that it's really helped. And I think I remember going into a lecture and writing notes, just quickly writing notes, and I went home, I didn't look at them 2-3 days, and I thought, oh crikey, what was I on about? I could not understand what I put. So I've started setting aside time in the day. I mean, I use about half an hour to an hour for wellness, for well-being. I will set aside time to note revise and expand on. So then, and sometimes I think, oh crikey, how am I going to find the time to do that? But I do find the time and I do it, and I'm thanking myself the following day. It's such a relief knowing that it's all been done. I think obviously when I started to get my assignments as well, what I've started doing with those is briefly beginning them. So obviously I haven't got all the knowledge yet that I need to be able to crack on with them, but subheadings, notes in them sections just to sort of get the ball rolling also helps me feel a lot better. I think as a result of this, as a result of being more organised, I feel so much more productive, a lot less stressed, and my confidence has increased. I have about an hour or 2 hours on a Sunday morning, and I'll just get up and think, are all my calendars, notebooks, everything, do they all collate with one another? And I'll make sure that they do. So then when I start that Monday, I've got a beautiful fresh week. And I think also, just to finish, that's a really good example to set to my children who are now progressing to higher education. I've bought them whiteboards, I've bought them diaries, I've got them journals, and I've thrown it in their faces to basically help them to structure, because I understand what it feels like not to be organised. So yeah, that's mine.
Fabulous. Thanks, Jenna. I think the team can't imagine you as being disorganised. It's hard to imagine because you are the organiser. So, but that's fab. Thank you for sharing that, Jenna. We're going to go quickly on to the P. And Tony Lee, do you want to tell people what you went for with the P?
Yeah, I went for portfolios. So I just wanted to start off by saying I know it seems overwhelming. It's a very long document, and during my first placement, I was struggling to understand how I would do that alongside my assignments. But once you kind of tackle it and you go in with a strategy, it becomes much more manageable. I found that by just entering like my personal details at first and all the kind of admin-y sections actually alleviated like 20% of the portfolio already. So I was like, oh, if I had just done this at the beginning, I would have got a big chunk of it out of the way. So that's like my first kind of tip for the portfolio. Enter in any information that you can, the practice educators information, your start date, any information about the agency where you're going to be working in for your placement, all that kind of admin-y stuff. Start off with that because that's like a big chunk of the portfolio done already. My other tip would also be, sorry, I can't even see I can see now. My other tip would be to basically keep up to date with the portfolio. So I did that by updating my index of evidence as and when I did important things, because if you leave it to the last minute or leave it to the end of the week, you'll often forget, and then it will become overbearing. You'll be like, oh, I'll do it next week, I'll do it. And then you'll find yourself having to do it last minute right before your midway, like what happened to me. And that's just not great to have to fill in 30 pieces of evidence. You probably won't even remember everything you did. So just taking 5 minutes before you finish the day to just write something very minimal of what you did will really help you with that, because the index of evidence is so important. It's basically what actually passes or fails you. If you don't evidence what you've been doing in your placement, you can be the greatest practitioner ever. If you don't have that in the portfolio, you know, they can't really progress you because you haven't demonstrated what you've been doing. So really focusing on that index of evidence, starting earlier rather than later, would be like my number one tip if I could order them. Working towards the deadlines within the portfolio as well. So your portfolio already kind of tells you how your placement is going to flow. So it starts off with the PLA, and then it goes on to the midway, and then your direct observations. I think you need to have one direct observation done before your midway, and then the PPDP, and then the last bit of the portfolio, which is the end of placement document. I would say use that as a guideline and timeline to kind of arrange yourself. So if you know your PLA is within 2 weeks, get all the information that needs to be done before that meeting takes place. Use it as a kind of measure as well to see how you're doing within placement and what areas of development you can kind of work on, or what you need to still kind of add to your index of evidence as well. So by my midway, I kind of looked at my index of evidence and I could see, oh, okay, I haven't had much experience in my latest placement with doing direct work with the children, specifically like using the direct tools like 3 Houses and other tools like that. So I kind of used my index of evidence to tell my practice educator what I wanted to do my direct observation on, so that I'm able to evidence that and I'm able to actually include it within my index of evidence, and, you know, demonstrate that skill. So using your portfolio as a way to kind of identify, I guess, gaps within your learning or gaps within your skills that you haven't developed yet is something that's so essential. Also, not being afraid to ask for help. Your practice educators are there to support you. They're going to accommodate you. They're going to, you know, they're expecting you to have questions. So don't go in like you understand it all or you know it all. Really be proactive with your learning and wanting to kind of understand things and get the most out of the placement, because it will only benefit you within your practice. Don't just see it as something that you kind of ticking off or tick box exercise. Like, really invest in yourself and invest in this portfolio, because it can really help you and develop expertise that you really want to get knowledge in. So that would be my tips for the portfolio.
Fabulous. Thanks for that, Tony. And also, just to say, you're going to need to keep a portfolio for the rest of your life. You've got ASYE portfolio, or first year in practice, wherever you are in the world, different name for it, but you've got that. And then you've got your own CPD portfolio in future. So it is about learning the skill of portfolio development. We're going to whiz through the next few letters. The Q we went for quick, actually, and that's as quick as we're going to go. But I went for quick because it actually feels like I think when you start at the beginning, you could say, oh, it's 3 years or 2 years to go, or whatever. It'll go quick as a flash. It will just go really quickly. And I think those people who are qualified now will tell you that, how quickly it went, especially, you know, when you look back at it, it's gone. So just, I suppose, savor it, use it, take every opportunity, take the kind of approaches that the team are sharing with you, to take every opportunity through your social work course. Or we went for relationships, just because relationships are so important in social work generally. But you're going to develop a range of relationships during your social work training. Every university is going to have different arrangements, but there'll be other students. You'll have a personal tutor, lecturers, placement tutors, placement organisers, practice educators, practice supervisors. That's all before you even start to develop relationships with people you're going to support as a student social worker. You know, put as much thought into building those relationships as you're going to in your future career. Because if you want to say, I'm going to be a relationship-based practitioner, think about the kinds of relationships that you have with all of those people responsible for supporting you in social work education. I know some university programs call the team around you the study team, or, you know, so think about who is the team around you that's supporting you and what is each of their roles. And you might, if you've got some specific learning needs, you might have a learning needs assistant, for example, or so. Just think about all of the different people involved, and you could even use some of your social work skills to do a little eco map of all of the people that are involved and who you're speaking to when and what their roles are. You need to understand everybody's role in your education. We're going to go on to S, and we took S as styles, just different styles that you've got. I love the idea of self-care and stability that we've got going on in the chat, but we went for just thinking about the different styles that you've got. You know, we've all got different styles in relation to learning, how we approach our education. What works for your colleagues won't necessarily work for you. And the different people involved in your learning journey might have a different style. Your educator might have a different style to the style that you've got. So understand people's styles, work to those styles, think through styles. We did in our adult learning webinar, this is a slide taken from there. We talked about what makes you a unique learner. We talked about adult learning styles. We talked about thinking styles. We talked about specific learning needs, diversity issues, life experience. Think about who you are. Think about the social graces and your styles and what makes you you, because you need to know about you. You need to understand you. And I suppose what I'd say is what we're encouraging you to do in the whole of this webinar is take a deeper approach to your learning. Don't just paddle in the sea. Get deep diving, really learn. You could just take a very surface approach, meet the criteria, get through the course. But actually, if this is your career, if this is going to be your forever career, and it's an amazing career, then you need to deep learn this stuff now, and you need to demonstrate your passion for this now. We're going to go on to T, and Kultuma, you took the letter T. We are running out of time, but I know that you will be able to explain your thoughts to us. So Kultuma, do you want to tell us what you went for T?
Yep, so for T, I went for targets, and the reason I've gone for targets is because it kind of links in with your deadlines and exams, portfolios, and when you've got so much going on, it can be really easy to sort of miss the mark. And one way I found, especially my final year, to keep on top of my deadlines is by setting targets. And in social work, you'll always get taught, you know, when you're working with individuals, to set SMART targets. So if we go on to the next slide, Siobhan, please. So we always get told to set SMART targets, which are making sure that your targets are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And I've used that in my studies to try and break down my assignments to help me to sort of stay on target. So I will set aside time, and I'll decide on what part of my assignment I'm working on, whether it's my introduction or the main body or the conclusion or whatever it is. And I will say, right, today I want to do 500 words by the time I go to bed. I like to procrastinate a lot, so I will set the word count for the whole day. So then that way, if I do procrastinate, it just means I have to go to bed a bit later. But I always make sure that I hit that word count target, and I set the targets in a way so that my word count is divided by the number of days I've got left for my deadline, but I always keep 2 days in hand. So then that way it doesn't seem very daunting when you're doing your assignment. You just think, actually, it's only 200 words, I can do that. And once you've reached your 200 words, you just sort of get into the flow of it and you think, actually, do you know what? I've got a few more hours left. I'll just add an extra couple of 100 words onto it. Or you think, if I do an extra couple 100 today, I can take a day off tomorrow. And it's about finding that balance. And I found doing this year really helped me find that balance between studying and family life and my placement as well, because especially in your second and third year, when you're balancing all those different plates and juggling everything, it can be very overwhelming. So I found using this method really helped me this year, and I wish I'd have thought of it in my previous years, because it would have made my life so much easier.
Thanks for that, Kultuma. And I think just getting those goals and learning how to set goals as well is also, this is stuff that you're using in your social work education, but you'll take forward into your career. And I think that's really helpful. So thank you for that. Thanks for that, Kultuma. Okay, we're going to go on to the letter U. And Kelly, you took the letter U. Do you want to take us through what you got?
I do. Thank you, Siobhan. So my letter is understanding or understand. So the way I was coming at it was, it's really important to understand your role as a social worker. And I'm really glad that you said what you did earlier, Siobhan, about placements. My first placement was at working with a drug and alcohol service. So it was a voluntary sector placement. And my second placement, my final placement, was working within children's mental health. So there were more social workers on the second placement than there were in the first one, but neither was statutory, even though the second one was within the NHS. So for me, what I realised is it's really important to know your role as a social worker and what it is that makes you a social worker and sets you apart, and what it is that's specific about your role. Because there may be lots of social workers there may not be many. There may be social workers, but they're doing a slightly different role, and it's really important to kind of know what your identity is as a social worker and what it is that kind of sets you apart. In England, we've got the PCF, and the very first one is understand the role of a social worker, promote the role of a social worker, uphold the profession. And how can you do all of that if you don't really know what it is you're supposed to be doing? So on my final placement, like my last placement, I was doing a mental health role with children, but the other people working alongside me were either social workers, occupational therapists, or nurses. But we were all doing the same thing, but we were all coming at it from a slightly different point of view, depending what our professional background was. But we were all doing the same thing, and kind of tying in with what Kai said, it's really interesting to do that, but sometimes you've got to advocate for, the viewpoint that you've got. And when you're in, we were in, a clinic setting, looking at, ADHD or autism diagnoses, kind of being a social worker and taking that person in environment approach is really needed. And on my first placement, my practice educator said, oh, that's a very social work way of looking at it. And I was like, oh, is that wrong? And she was like, no, that's the person you were working with isn't a social worker, so she wouldn't have thought that. So it's kind of really important to understand your viewpoint and your profession's viewpoint, and to kind of advocate for that, because if you don't understand it, how can you uphold it? And then when you are on placement or you're in the workplace, you may be the only social worker, or you may be one of very few. And how do you keep your professional identity, or do you just become like everybody else? So I think it's really important, and it's something that I've been thinking about, and I'll carry on thinking about. So yeah, it's something to keep in your mind for me, definitely.
Fabulous, thank you. Thanks for that, Kelly. I think definitely when we're working in multidisciplinary teams, or where there's not lots of social workers, that understanding of the role is key. So thank you for that. I'm going to whiz through the last few letters. So V, I went for values. I mean, it was an obvious one, wasn't it, really? But it's just really, in terms of values and ethics, are just core aspects of social work. So they should be woven through all of your education. What I think is that you might find that the values that you go into social work education with will be challenged through social work education. And even quite a lot of people say that during their social work training, they find that sometimes some of their friendship groups, even sometimes within their family, they find they're challenging those people because they're learning new things and new ideas and values and ethics. And I think those professional values will become part of who you are. So you will start to challenge people a bit. You will start to see differences in your relationships outside of social work, actually, as part of your social work education. So I think that's just something to be prepared for and ready for, because I do think it will change the relationships that you have with other people. And that's usually down to thinking things through in terms of values. We have done values webinars before, a few of them, but just to say, one of the things that I found particularly helpful, maybe in the last 10 or 12 years or so, is to do what I call a values daisy. There's in the reflective practice cards, there's a values daisy card, because I think it's really important for us to think about the different values systems that are at play in any situation. You'll often hear in your training about personal and professional values. But I think it's also important to be clear that there are also organisational values at play. When I qualified 32 years ago, I think the organisations that employed social workers had social work values, but I don't think they always do now. And I think the organisational values can sometimes be in conflict, because politically the organisation wants to save money, you know, and that's not what we wanted to do as social workers. And so the values systems can end up being in conflict with each other. And then you've got societal values. We've all seen the societal values around, particularly thinking about immigration and some of the stuff that we've seen coming out in the news, societal values around, you know, the valuing of people or devaluing or dehumanizing of people. So I think it's important that you think about, in every situation, all of the values that are at play, and really learn about the different values that are at play in every situation. So that's what I went for V. Now for W, I've really thought about this, and I've thought about, should I actually share this or not, or I don't, but for W, I've gone for worry. I find that students often can be quite anxious about things, sometimes anxious about placement, sometimes anxious about grades, or anxious about, I think, and I remember a phrase, and I don't know, I've tried to reference it, I don't know where it came from, but the phrase is that anxiety impedes learning, whereas apprehension can enhance learning. It's a natural thing to be apprehensive about something, and that can actually open you up to learning, but anxiety will close you down to learning. So I think try and find, if you know that you have some levels of anxiety about your learning, try and find some strategies for dealing with that. I also think that, you know, developing skills in dealing with worries, if you like, is important, because social work is full of uncertainty, and how you manage that is going to be vital for your longer term career and your self-care, really. So think about how you're going to handle your worries. I have had times in my career, I would say at the moment, I wouldn't describe myself as being an anxious person, but there are times where I do have quite high levels of anxiety about things, and I can worry quite a lot about different things. And one strategy that I found really helpful, and it sounds silly, but is to set worry time. And I wondered if this kind of links into Kultuma's and maybe Jenna's organisation. Jenna says, you know, she has half an hour of self-care. Well, at times when I have found myself being quite worried about things, I have set myself a certain worry time. Now, the suggestion that psychologists make is that your worry time is at the same time each day, and preferably in the same place. So you might have, you know, 20 minutes worrying just before you make the tea, or 20 minutes. Don't do it just before you go to bed, because then you might go to bed worried. It's hard to stop the worry time then. What's important is you end the worry time by doing something else. So that's why I'd say don't go to bed. End worry time with cooking the tea, or end worry time with. In our house, when my children were growing up, they were older, so not young children, but when they were older and teenagers, we used to have what we called the rendezvous time in our house, and it was 9 o'clock. Everybody, wherever we were in the house, we would rendezvous at 9 o'clock, and we'd do something together, whether we'd play a game or watch something on the telly, but we'd do something together for an hour between 9 and 10. Didn't matter what all of us were doing. Rendezvous time at 9, and so I used to do my worry time from 8:30. And it would end at rendezvous time. And it was really clear. It gave me that, okay, I'm going to worry about these things. I'd write the worries down. I'd go back to them. They were never as worried. I was never as worried about them the next day. Or I think you need to find a way of allowing yourself to worry. Because if I say to you now, anxiety impedes your learning, so don't worry. I mean, when someone says to you, don't worry, you just worry all the more, don't you? So what strategies are you going to find to manage your worries? And I do think worry time can be helpful. Worry monsters are great with young people, and we can use them ourselves. I think I wouldn't use a monster, but I might use a worry jar, something like that. So worrying, I think, you will worry during your social work education. Find a way of handling it. There's also, if you think about Stephen Covey's idea around circles of concern, and that's been added into, hasn't it, by circles of influence and control. So what are you worried about, if you like? What are you concerned about? That's the big circle. But what can you control? You can only control the small circle. So don't get het up on the stuff that's outside of your control. There is no purpose you worrying about what kind of placement am I going to get? What kind of a placement am I going to get? Because actually, you can't control that. That's down to the practice learning coordinator. So why not worry about how am I going to make the most of the placement that I get? Because that's inside of your control. So think about outside of your control, what you can influence, but you can't control. And then what's completely outside of your control anyway, there's no point worrying about it. So there's something there, thinking about how you're going to handle your worries. The X is always the most difficult one for us to do on the A to Z webinars. I notice nobody ever chooses X. None of the team ever say, I'll help you out with the X, Siobhan, I'll go for that one. No one's ever done it. So I thought, what am I going to do with the X? And I went for excellence. It's a cheat, but it's kind of X. You might be worried about, I want to be excellent. I want to get a first. I want to choose what you want to excel in, because that says something about your values. I would like social work students who excel in being allies to people who are experiencing oppression. I would like to think that you are excelling in being an ally to the colleagues that you've got on your course who are experiencing oppression. I would like to see people who excel in being kind to one another. I would like to see that. To me, that's more important than the grades that you're going to get. It doesn't matter. Nobody's ever going to ask you. Just think about how many students on your course are experiencing oppression and how are you being an ally to them. That kind of thing. That's what I want you to excel in. And then why? So unfortunately, Kat can't be here tonight either, work issues, but Kat went for the why and she went for you. And Kat went for just always being aware of the personal you, the professional you, how they might be different, that whole, do you remember the 3 Ps we talk about a lot, the personal, the professional, the private? Think about the impact the work has on you, think about the impact you have on the work. I would say you learn a lot about yourself during social work education. You'll see yourself in so many different ways, like that mirror image at the bottom there. You'll see yourself in different ways through your social work education. And Z, I've gone for Zoom, and the Zoom that I've gone for is because so much of your learning now is online. Think about how you're going to approach it. And please, if I'm just going to give you a plea from social work educators' perspective, put your camera on. Be like Kai. Remember when Kai said he's in a group, he's got his camera on, no one else has? It is so demoralizing. It's so difficult to provide a lecture that is interesting and engaging if nobody's got their cameras on. So please put your cameras on if you are doing your social work education online. I love the team, keep their cameras on largely so that I can see them when we're doing the webinars. It's really important. So there we go, Zoom. There is our A to Z poster. So as a quick summary for social work education, we went for A is for assignments, B is for books, C is for curiosity, D for deadlines, E for exams, F for feedback, G for grades, H for horrible modules, I for interprofessional collaboration, J for joining in, K for the knowledge base, L for lived experience, M for mind the gap, N, not all social work is statutory, O for organisation, P, portfolios, Q, it'll go quick as a flash, R for relationships, S for your styles, T for setting targets, U for understanding, V for values, W for worry, X with a bit of a cheat for excellence, Y for you, Z for Zoom, and that takes us through our team's A to Z of social work education. We are going to be taking a break now. We always finish each season with an A to Z, so you know that it's the end of our season. We're going to take a well-deserved short break, and we're going to be back on the 7th of September. We've got a fabulous season of webinars coming up with some really amazing stuff. You'd think we'd run out of ideas after 90, but they're still coming strong. So we will see you in September, on the 7th of September. I think the team will be putting the link into the chat now, although Chris, who has switched the camera off, so I'm taking it she's gone on to court 1 now and is watching something at Wimbledon, but she's still hanging on in there with us. Chris normally sets up the webinar links, and I had to do it tonight because Chris is in Wimbledon, so who knows where you might end up with the link I've set up. I mean, you never know. I'd check it out before September the 7th and make sure I've set it up right. But anyway, I think the team will be putting it into the chat. Have a fabulous summer, and we look forward to seeing you next season. Good night, everybody. Bye. Oh, I've forgotten how to stop the webinar, everyone, now. There we go. I found it. Night, everybody. Bye.